All right. So Epicureanism. In some ways, it's a very modern approach rather than kind of believing in kind of gods. I mean, there is a sort of belief in God of some kind, but it's a very different sort of a belief in God, and it makes the gods irrelevant. And basically, it is the idea is based on the idea that the world is made of atoms, and the atoms are moving basically predictably with a little bit of randomness, and that's all there is to the world. So Epicurus, he was born roughly the same around. He was living around the same time as Aristotle. He was from the Greek island of Samos, and so he, I guess, he lived for about maybe 70 years, something like that, and he's especially known for what's called the garden, which is basically the name of his school, the name of where he taught outside of Athens. So he wrote a lot. He wrote a 37-book work. That was his main text. He also wrote another work on called the Canon, and that was nearly all lost. So if we'd ever been able to keep hold of that, he might have been just as important as Plato and Aristotle. But what we have left is a bunch of aphorisms, kind of short, kind of sayings by him, and we have some letters by him, and then we have what other people wrote about what he said. It's kind of a shame that all that work was lost. So he established his school called the Garden, and so he taught philosophy, and he had followers, and the followers, at least some of them, lived and worked in the garden. So it was like he was community living. And in some ways, although it's a little bit of a historical anachronism, we might think of Epicurus as a bit of a hippie. He kind of he didn't want to live in the city. He wanted to kind of live outside of the city. He didn't want to have to deal with all the stuff that was going on in the city. It's like hippies going to live upstate, and they want to kind of check out from the regular rat race and just live their own lives. So his idea was you have a garden, which maybe they do a little bit of farming there, and they have a self-sufficient and supportive community. And they lived a simple life. They liked food like bread and olives. And the main thing they valued was friendship. And mainly what they wanted was freedom from anxiety, which is pretty easy to relate to, actually. I mean, who doesn't want freedom from anxiety? It seems like a good thing. So it seems like he made his money by charging some people for his services. Although if it was maybe a bit like a commune, then maybe everybody sort of chipped in, and maybe expenses weren't really very high. He himself was not married, and he had no children. And to some extent, he himself was not a big fan of marriage because he wanted a life free from anxiety. And he thought marriage is not going to give him a life free from anxiety. He thought marriage was difficult. And he didn't want children because again, he wanted a life free from anxiety, and kids are a pain in the neck. So he didn't want to have to deal with that. So this garden was probably a substantial property, maybe a sort of a mansion. It probably had a central courtyard, and probably had kind of people doing some scholarly work, had servants doing stuff. And the garden was, was known as a place where people came and learned. So he had followers. Epicureanism was not the most popular approach in ancient Greece and Rome, but it certainly had its followers. So he traveled around, he met people. There were various people like Metrodorus and Hermachus and Polyaenus, and they followed him, and other people kind of learned from him, and then they formed their own schools. Maybe what's especially noticeable about Epicurus is that in the garden, he had women who were participating as philosophers, thinking about how to live. There were women called Themista and Leontion. And also, it was open to slaves. So slaves could come and learn and contribute too. So it was a lot more open, and I mean, maybe not quite democratic, but at least it was open to all. And he had his own slave who also participated. So the Epicureans were sort of known to kind of treat their slaves well. Now, from our point of view, you might think, well, that's all very nice, but they still had slaves. But they, presumably that this is one of the most progressive attitudes around at the time. I don't think I've ever really heard of anybody back then who said, oh, we just shouldn't have any slaves at all. I mean, sort of the best attitude you could find was, it's okay to have slaves, but you have to treat your slaves well. So Epicurus took the ideas of the pre-Socratics, Leucippus and Democritus, and their atomistic views, and kind of built a whole way of thinking on that. So that's a sort of scientific view, but it's also, I mean, scientific seems a little bit of a stretch in that it's not like he was doing experiments in his lab. He just had this theory and he liked this theory. He didn't have any real proof that atomism was true, but he did kind of think about it, and so it ended up being an influential view. And in some ways, we have embraced a form of atomism today. But he's also talking about how to live. And he's rejecting a lot of the ideas of people like Plato and Aristotle, who have all their ideas about kind of wisdom, or trying to be moral, or trying to achieve a kind of escape from the body. He doesn't believe any of that. He thinks that the best kind of life is you just try to enjoy your life as much as possible and be free from pain. And certainly try not to be anxious about stuff when there's no reason to be anxious about it. He ended up being very influential. I think in some ways it's a view which you might well take very seriously now, the idea that the best kind of life is a life you enjoy. And that seems a pretty good kind of life. One thing to be just a little bit careful of is these days we use the phrase Epicurean to refer to people who are just seeking lots of pleasure. And that's not him. Epicureans these days, you think, oh, that they're going to go for like a fancy meal and try to kind of really ramp up the excitement in their taste. While the Epicureans think the way to live a happy life is to lead a simple life. So they were out there in this garden area. They were secluded. They tried to avoid most of the stuff that was going on in the city. They tried to avoid politics. They stayed out of all that stuff. And they just focused on their friendships and enjoying themselves together. They valued friendships above all other social relations, which is sort of surprising maybe to us because we tend to think of family as being more important than friends. But the Epicureans were saying, well, family, not so much. Friendships are really where it's at. And they recommended a sparse diet, and they would consider having a piece of cheese, kind of like, oh, it's a big day today, you're going to have some cheese. They had a very sparse life. And so the whole philosophy is about escaping anxiety, escaping pain, and they think that is the main way to be happy. It's an interesting idea that pain is a lot worse than pleasure is good. So pain is something that can be really intense and really long lasting. Pleasure is by itself is kind of probably more temporary, more fleeting. So rather than trying to get lots of pleasure, the Epicureans say the best kind of life is one where you avoid pain and you go for a little pleasure. So the Epicureans thought that everything is basically atoms, it's all matter. They don't believe in any kind of dualism. They don't believe that there's the world of forms or anything like that. They don't believe in sort of spirituality. They just believe that all we have is the physical world. So then what are you going to say about gods? So what they said may be a little bit different from what they really believed. Well, in terms of what they said, well, yeah, there are gods, but the gods are going to be nice, and the gods are not going to be interested in us, so we don't need to worry about the gods. It's in some ways it would make more kind of sense on their view just to say that the gods don't exist, that there's no such thing as gods. It's possible that that could have got them into trouble, so they might have avoided kind of denying there are gods. It hadn't been that long since Socrates had been put to death on the charge of not believing in the gods. So it seems that it was probably pretty smart not to go around denying that gods exist. But what they said was the gods do exist, and they're just not interested in humans. So they think, well, there are sort of many universes. The gods are going to be out there in other universes. The gods are just going to be totally uninterested in human life. There's also sort of a classic argument from evil saying, well, if you think that the gods are interested in human life, then why do the gods allow evil to happen? That's a long-standing worry that skeptics put to religious believers. So maybe back then people were worried about the gods and wanted to get the favor of the gods. It's pretty easy to understand. It's also easy to understand why they might have been worried about death. Probably the average lifespan wasn't that long. And it's not like they had a lot of medicine. So it makes sense to be at least thinking about how to prolong your life. But Epicurus says, don't be anxious. Don't worry about death. Because that just spoils your life. And that also, he thinks there's no reason to be worried about death. That seems like a somewhat surprising claim, right? I mean, dying is upsetting. Many of us worry that we're gonna die before our time. So what is his argument that death is not bad? He says, well, when you're alive, you're not dead. So so long as you exist, death hasn't happened. And the death is in your future, but you can't touch that future experience. And when you're dead, then you're not going to experience anything. He doesn't believe in any kind of soul or life after death. So there's not going to be any sensation. He's not worried about the underworld because he doesn't think an underworld exists. So death is simply non-existence, and you're not going to experience anything there. So there's nothing to worry about there either. In some ways, it seems like an argument which seems a bit quick. I mean, it's certainly true that when I'm dead, if you're an atomist like him, you're not going to, I'm not going to have any experiences. But I might still worry, well, I want to live to 100. And what about that? And so he has his other argument, which is sort of interesting. He says, you didn't fear or suffer from the time before your birth, and you don't wish, oh, I wish I'd been born 100 years earlier. Like, we accept the date of our birth. So the time before you were born, that's just there, and like we can say, oh yeah, I was born, and there was time before I was born, but it's not like I wish I'd been born earlier. So he says similarly, is there going to be the time of your death, and then you don't need to wish you died later. Sort of curious analogy. It doesn't seem obviously right, but it's an interesting idea. Right. So he says, like, when you're alive, you should enjoy your life, and when you're dead, you're going to be dead. So nothing to worry about that. So a wise person is going to try and seek the most pleasant time, not the longest time. You're not aiming to have a long life. Maybe it's nice if you have a long life, but having a long life is not necessary. And you have to kind of be sort of aware of how much you're in control of and how much you're not in control of. And you have to be realistic about that. We're going to see this distinction between what you're in control of and what you're not in control of with the Stoics. And the Stoics are somewhat rigid about it. The Epicureans think, well, there's some things you can control, some things you can't control. Exactly what that is going to be contextual, but he thinks that you shouldn't be unrealistic, because if you despair about stuff you can't control, that's going to be a problem for you. So the Epicureans, in some ways, they defend this having a simple life by talking about different kinds of desires. So there's the desire to have stuff which will keep you alive. So you need food and water. You need shelter from harsh weather. You need that to keep you alive. So that in some ways, that's a very, very obvious desire. Then, like, you want to stay healthy, so you have a desire to kind of look after yourself. And then you want to have a desire for, you have a desire for happiness. Those all seem like they're desires which make a good deal of sense. What he argues against is that you shouldn't be nurturing your desires for luxuries. You shouldn't be looking for lots of pleasure. You shouldn't be looking for lots of property. So he says, like wanting jewelry, for instance, that has no basis in nature. That's not going to help you live longer. It's not even going to help you be happier. So you should focus on living a simple life rather than a life of luxury. So what we're looking for is like this, a life free of pain. Really, the only time we really need pleasure is when not having it causes us pain. If we're not in pain, then we don't really need pleasure. The greatest kind of pleasure is kind of mental. The kind of pleasure that they really value is friendship. So you should be aiming to kind of have a life free from physical pain, free from emotional pain. And then a big part of it is that you need to do calculations about how you are going to get the life most free from pain. So like these days, you'll make a decision about whether you want to get, say, a flu vaccine. Now, a flu vaccine can give you like, there's the injection. That's a little bit of pain. And then you can have some side effects from a flu vaccine for a day or two. But then the idea is it's worth it because that saves you from getting the flu. And flu can be a very terrible experience. So it's worth getting a little pain in order to save yourself from more pain. You might take another example, somewhat familiar to you. You go to college. Now, are you loving every minute of your college experience? Probably not. So why do you do it? Well, you do it because you think going through that will lead you to a better life. You'll be able to get a better job. You'll be more secure in your employment, and so you'll be more free from anxiety. That's the goal. So we make these calculations. So it may be that sometimes we should deny ourselves pleasure too, because sometimes doing something which is pleasurable can cause pain. So an obvious example would be drinking half a bottle of vodka. You can feel pretty good for a while, but then having a half a bottle of vodka will probably also be not good for your body, and your body will react, and you may throw up, or you may get a terrible headache the next day. Heroin, probably also not a great idea. And then, so it seems like eating huge amounts of food, you can have bad repercussions from that. So it makes sense to sacrifice having immediate pleasure sometimes if it's going to lead to pain in the long run. So that's a big part of his view, is that you have to kind of do the calculation to work out what's going to lead to the wisest decision. One of his basic ideas is you should lead life in a self-sufficient way. You should, if you need lots of stuff, if you need lots of income, then your life is going to be more anxious. You're going to be more worried about losing your job. You're going to be more worried about keeping all the stuff you have. Whereas if all you have is like simple pleasures, then you're not going to be so worried because it's much easier just to kind of look after yourself in a basic way. You don't have to rely on other people. You are just able to enjoy your life without worries. So I mentioned that Epicurus himself was not a fan of marriage and he didn't have kids. Epicureans generally kind of thought that family life was fine, it could be beneficial, but they definitely don't think that there's any sort of moral obligation to have a family and kids. They thought the marriage could be good, but again, not required. And so basically, their idea is that you're aiming for a life of tranquility, ataraxia, not because of any sorts of, so you don't get married for any sorts of pressures or anything like that. So sex is a sort of interesting case too for the Epicureans. You think if you're seeking a life of pleasure, then maybe you should be having lots of sex. But they were saying, well, be cautious about that. For one thing, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. So that you're going to be careful about that. But also, they thought that trying to get lots of sex can also lead to anxiety and conflict. And that's not going to lead you to a tranquil life. So they were kind of saying, don't necessarily go for lots of sex. Just to have as much as you sort of need to have in order to kind of live okay. They thought that kind of deep friendships and intellectual conversation actually are more reliable sources of pleasure than sex. So I guess they must have had really good friendships. So they also, Epicurus said, avoid passionate love. If you, falling in love with somebody can be very stormy and can lead to kind of a total loss of tranquility. So Epicurus says, don't do that. Kind of just avoid all that. He definitely, Epicurus himself recommended against marriage. So on their view, the Epicureans are basically selfish, right? Their view is basically lead a life which is going to be good for you. So then, well, what do they think about morality? What do they think about doing the right thing? Well, the basic view is the only time that you have to kind of follow justice is where you've actually made a contract with somebody else, you've made a promise, and then you should follow that promise. So they don't really think that anything injustice is in itself bad, but they do think that you should basically be a law-abiding citizen, because if you go around breaking the law, you're going to be worried about getting caught and being prosecuted. So the basic view is it's kind of it's good to be nice. It's good to kind of not hurt other people, because in the long run, that's going to be good for you. And to some extent, they don't really believe in morality at all. They just think that you should lead a life which is going to be tranquil, and the best way to get a tranquil life is not to be breaking all sorts of rules. So the basic idea is you should focus on your own happiness. They do think that a happy life requires having friends, and it's essential for you to care for your friends and help them, because that's what friendship is. If you don't care for your friends, then that's not really a friendship, and you're not going to enjoy it. But then the other stuff, like kind of getting involved in politics, doing kind of stuff in the local town, he says they're kind of like, well, do that if you have to, because do if it's going to be necessary to keep your life tranquil, but otherwise stay away. So the whole idea of what it means to lead a virtuous life, uh, they don't believe in morality in itself. All they really believe in is leading a tranquil life. And their attitude basically is, well, being a nice person is going to be more likely to lead you to a tranquil life than being an asshole. People who are assholes tend to have untranquil lives. So let's say a little bit about their atomism. Already mentioned that. So it is based on the ideas of Democritus and Leucippus. And it was basically kind of denying all the supernatural stuff. He built on this view of the atomists. He tried to explain why atoms move. He thought, well, the atoms have a weight, and so they move downwards. They just have a natural downward movement. And when one atom hits another, then they'll have to change into a different direction. One sort of interesting idea that Epicurus introduced was he didn't think that everything was totally deterministic. He thought there was some randomness in the world. He called this the swerve. He thought like there was an initial, and all these atoms were moving in the same direction initially, and then one just swerved from its initial direction and hit another one, and that led to lots of interaction between the atoms, and maybe that led to the creation of the world as we know it. He didn't have any explanation of why there was like this original randomness, but he kind of said that he just thought it was there. So it seems like he introduced it to avoid determinism. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but basically he thinks that, seems like he thinks we have to have free will. And if you thought that everything was determined, then we wouldn't have free will. So he introduces a little randomness into the world. So we're going to talk about, soon we'll be talking about the Stoics. And it's sort of very illuminating to see the contrast between the Stoics and the Epicureans about their view of the world. So the Epicureans basically think like the world is made of atoms. They interact in a predictable way with a little bit of randomness. But I think that's all there is. They don't think there's any kind of sort of ultimate meaning to the universe. They don't believe in a guiding principle. They don't think the universe was designed. Basically, they think the world is just basically random. So that's very different from the Stoic view. The Stoics think the world is totally rational. It's all designed and spiritual. The Stoics think that the world ultimately kind of makes sense from a cosmic point of view. Whereas the Epicureans just reject that. They say, look, the world is kind of random. Your job is just to work to find tranquility in this random world. So they reject fate. They don't believe that, the Epicureans don't believe that there's a kind of, everybody has a fate or anything like that. They don't even, they don't believe in stuff like karma. They just think that the world is kind of random, and we have free will. They do have this theory about the soul and the mind. So if you're an atomist, you just think everything is made of matter. You don't think there's any kind of immaterial soul. So basically, we're just material things. This mind and the soul are the same thing. They're made of atoms, and they're like any other part of the universe. Epicurus did think like the soul had two parts. He thought there was like the animus, which is like the lively part. That is kind of located in the chest, and then there's the anima, which is distributed throughout the body. It's kind of curious claim he's making. But he thinks like it's this animus in the chest which controls the body and other soul parts, receiving and processing information from the senses. I think that idea that the center of control of your body was in your chest was a reasonably common one back in ancient times. Obviously, now we know that your brain is what is controlling your body, but to them it wasn't so obvious. I think they had a theory that the function of the brain was to cool the blood. They didn't think it did anything significant about control at all. Finally, Epicurus had a theory of sensation. How do we get experiences? He thought there was a special type of atom which is responsible for sensation, allowing sensory input. Well, that's pretty hard to understand. So that gives you like this view of Epicureanism. It seems like in some ways, like quite a modern worldview. This idea that the world is just made of atoms, and that's all it is to it. And we try to be happy in a random universe.